Edwin Chapo Rosario was Puerto Rico's golden boy, a devastating puncher who became world champion and earned a place in the Hall of Fame. But on December 1, 1997, at just 34 years old, he was found dead in his childhood bedroom. The official cause? Pulmonary edema and an aneurysm. But the real story is far more complex. And over 25 years later, one haunting question remains. Was Edwin Rosario's death really just bad luck? Or was it the inevitable end of a cycle that started long before he ever stepped into a ring? To understand how it all unraveled, we have to go back to where the tragedy first took root. Edwin Rosario's story began in disaster, and perhaps that should have been our first warning. Born in 1962 in the impoverished Candelaria barrio of Toa Baja, Puerto Rico, Edwin entered a world where opportunity was scarce and dreams often died young. The concrete streets of Candelaria weren't kind to children. This wasn't the Puerto Rico of tourist brochures. It was a place where families scraped by, where young men looked for any escape from poverty's grip. For the Rosario family, that escape would come wrapped in boxing gloves. Edwin was just 6 years old when he first stepped into a boxing gym, following in the footsteps of his older brother, Papo. And Papo wasn't just any fighter. He was a rising star with what many considered a promising professional career ahead of him. To young Edwin, his brother was everything he wanted to become. Respected, skilled, and making money with his fists. But boxing in the Rosario household carried a weight that went beyond sport. This wasn't just about recreation or fitness, it was about survival. In neighborhoods like Candelaria, boxing offered one of the few legitimate paths out of poverty. And Edwin, even at 6, showed the kind of natural talent that made people stop and take notice. The boy was different from other kids his age. Where most children his size threw wild, uncontrolled punches, Edwin displayed an instinctive understanding of timing and power. His hands were quick, his footwork surprisingly advanced. More importantly, he had that rare quality that separates good fighters from great ones. He wasn't afraid to get hit. But just as Edwin's own professional dreams were taking shape, disaster struck the Rosario family. Papo, the brother who had inspired Edwin's boxing journey, died unexpectedly. The cause? Drug use. Edwin was still a teenager, just 2 years into his own professional career, when he lost the person who had shown him that boxing could be a way out. The death devastated Edwin, but it also transformed him. Where other young fighters might have been motivated by dreams of fame or fortune, Edwin was driven by something deeper, a need to honor his brother's memory by achieving the championship that Papo would never have the chance to win. That motivation pushed Edwin to turn professional at just 15 years old. In an era when most fighters spent years building their amateur credentials, Edwin jumped straight into the paid ranks. He was hungry, determined, and carrying the weight of his family's expectations on his young shoulders. His early professional record was nothing short of spectacular. Fight after fight, Edwin destroyed opponents with devastating power. His explosive right hand became legendary in Puerto Rican boxing circles, and his rock-solid chin meant he could trade punches with anyone brave enough to stand in front of him. In those early years, Edwin compiled a stunning record: 21 wins with 20 knockouts. Those weren't just victories, they were statements. Each knockout was a declaration that Edwin Chapo Rosario was a force to be reckoned with. Boxing magazines took notice, eventually placing him on Ring Magazine's prestigious list of the heaviest hitters of all time. But success in the ring couldn't erase the tragedy that had shaped him. Edwin carried his brother's death like a scar, and those close to him noticed how that loss had introduced something troubling into his life. The same substances that had claimed Papo were becoming a presence in Edwin's world too. Still, nothing seemed capable of slowing Edwin's rise. His aggressive, no-nonsense fighting style made him must-see television. Fans didn't just watch Edwin Rosario fight, they witnessed wars. Every bout was a violent chess match, where Edwin's devastating power was both his greatest weapon and his most dangerous vulnerability. The breakthrough moment came on May 1, 1983, when Edwin faced José Luis Ramirez for the vacant WBC lightweight title. It was the fight that would transform him from a promising prospect into a world champion. At just 20 years old, Edwin had reached the pinnacle of professional boxing. The fight against Ramirez was everything Edwin's early career had promised. Despite injuring his hand during the bout, he outboxed and outfought the veteran Ramirez, earning a unanimous decision victory. When the final bell sounded, Edwin Chapo Rosario was no longer just another fighter from the barrios, he was a world champion. That night, as Edwin held the WBC lightweight belt above his head, it seemed like all the pain and struggle had been worth it. He had honored his brother's memory, lifted his family out of poverty, and achieved every Puerto Rican boxer's ultimate dream. The kid from Candelaria had conquered the world. He went on to defend his title twice, including a dramatic split-decision victory over Olympic gold medalist Howard Davis Jr., where Edwin scored a knockdown in the final seconds to secure the win. Each victory seemed to prove that his championship wasn't a fluke. Edwin Rosario belonged among boxing's elite. But champions in boxing learn quickly that reaching the top is only half the battle. Staying there requires not just skill and determination, but the ability to handle pressure, fame, and the constant target on your back that comes with wearing a world title. And for Edwin, those challenges would prove far more difficult than any opponent he'd ever faced in the ring. Because success, as he was about to discover, can be just as dangerous as failure, especially when you're carrying demons that no championship belt can quiet. June 13, 1986. A date that would haunt Edwin Rosario for the rest of his short life. Madison Square Garden was electric that night, packed with over 10,000 fans who had come to witness something rare. Two of Puerto Rico's greatest boxing heroes going to war against each other. The bout was billed as Friday the 13th Resurrection, and it lived up to every bit of its ominous name. Edwin Rosario, the reigning WBA lightweight champion, was set to face Hector Macho Camacho in what many considered the biggest all-Puerto Rican clash in boxing history. But this wasn't just about national pride or bragging rights. The financial stakes told a different story entirely. Camacho, the flashy showman with the undefeated record, commanded a massive $500,000 purse. Rosario, just $150,000. The disparity was glaring, a clear indication of who the boxing world saw as the bigger star. That pay gap should have been the first warning sign. Despite Rosario's devastating power and championship credentials, he was already being treated as the B-side in his own biggest fight. The boxing business had made its choice about who was more marketable. And it wasn't the quiet, workmanlike champion from Candelaria. When the opening bell rang, the styles couldn't have been more different. Rosario came forward like a hurricane, pressing the action with the same relentless aggression that had carried him to the top. Camacho, meanwhile, danced and moved, using his superior speed and slick boxing skills to stay out of danger. For 4 rounds, it was a tactical chess match. Camacho winning rounds with his jab and movement, Rosario looking to land the one big shot that could change everything. But boxing fans know that in fights like these, everything can change in an instant. The 5th round was that instant. Rosario connected with a devastating left hook that shook Camacho badly and buckled his knees. For those watching ringside, it looked like the end was near. Camacho, the undefeated Golden Boy, was suddenly in serious trouble. What happened next revealed everything about both fighters' characters. Camacho, badly hurt and facing the biggest crisis of his career, abandoned any pretense of boxing and simply ran. As one observer put it, he had to run like the devil just to survive the remainder of the round. But survive he did. And in the rounds that followed, Camacho showed the heart of a true champion. Using his superior conditioning and boxing IQ, he swept the next 5 rounds with quick feet and a consistent jab, keeping the dangerous Rosario at a safe distance. The pattern seemed set until the 11th round brought another dramatic twist. Once again, Rosario hurt Camacho with another thunderous left hook, forcing the slick boxer to flee around the ring. Then came the 12th and final round, where Rosario dominated so thoroughly that many ringside observers were convinced he had done enough to win. When the final bell sounded, the garden was buzzing with anticipation. This had been the kind of fight that creates legends, the kind of back-and-forth war that fans talk about for decades. But now came the moment that would define both men's careers forever. The scorecards told a story of razor-thin margins and subjective interpretation. Judge Luis Rivera scored it 113-114 for Edwin Rosario, but judges Tony Castellano and Stuart Kirschenbaum both favored Camacho by identical scores of 115-113. Split decision victory for Hector Camacho. The crowd erupted in controversy, and the debate began immediately. Had the judges been swayed by Camacho's flashier style? Had they undervalued Rosario's moments of dominance? The questions would linger for decades. But the real tragedy wasn't just in the scorecards, it was in what the fight revealed about the sport itself. Rosario had given a masterful performance, hurting his undefeated opponent multiple times and controlling the action when it mattered most. Yet, somehow, he walked away the loser. The aftermath was even more telling. The punishment Camacho endured that night left an indelible mark on his fighting style. He evolved from an aggressive puncher into a cautious, risk-averse boxer who prioritized slick movement and defense over offensive exchanges. Rosario had fundamentally altered the trajectory of a fellow Hall of Fame career. In Puerto Rico, where the fight was televised live, the controversy sparked passionate debates that continue to this day. But the most disturbing consequence came when a local newspaper reported a murder related to a gambling dispute over the fight's outcome. Even in victory and defeat, violence followed these warriors home. For Rosario, the loss was devastating in ways that went beyond the official record. He had proven himself against an undefeated champion, had shown heart and skill that should have been rewarded with victory. Instead, he was left with moral victories and what-if scenarios. The fight also revealed something troubling about Rosario's future prospects. Despite his incredible talent and championship credentials, the boxing business had already decided he wasn't the star they wanted to build around. He was the action fighter, the come-forward warrior who made other fighters look good. But Edwin wasn't the type to dwell on controversy or injustice. Just months after the heartbreaking loss to Camacho, he demonstrated his resilience and devastating power by defeating Livingstone Bramble with a second-round knockout to reclaim the WBA lightweight title. That victory made him only the second boxer in history to win the lightweight title 3 times, cementing his place among the division's all-time greats. But even as he celebrated his championship return, darker forces were already gathering on the horizon. Because Edwin Rosario's greatest battles weren't always fought in boxing rings, and the opponent that would ultimately defeat him was one that no amount of heart, skill, or devastating power could overcome. Edwin Rosario's greatest strength, His willingness to engage in wars became the weapon that destroyed him. November 21st, 1987. Las Vegas. The stage was set for what many believed would be the defining fight of Edwin's career. A unification bout against the relentless Julio Cesar Chavez. Chavez wasn't just another champion. He was a perfect storm of technical skill and savage intensity. While Edwin had built his reputation on devastating power, Chavez had forged his legend through systematic destruction, breaking down opponents with surgical precision and relentless pressure. The build-up to the fight had all the ingredients of a classic. Two undefeated champions, two different styles, two nations' pride on the line. But what nobody anticipated was how perfectly Chavez would neutralize everything that made Edwin dangerous. From the opening bell, Chavez executed a strategy that bordered on genius. Instead of trying to outbox Edwin from the outside, he stayed right in his face, turning the fight into a close-quarters battle of attrition. Every time Edwin tried to create space for his devastating power shots, Chavez smothered him with clinches and inside work. For Edwin, it was like fighting in a phone booth. His explosive right hand, the weapon that had carried him to 3 lightweight titles, became useless when Chavez pressed against him, firing short uppercuts and brutal body shots. The Mexican champion had done his homework. He knew exactly how to nullify Edwin's greatest assets. Round after round, the punishment mounted. Edwin's celebrated rock-solid chin was being tested like never before. Chavez worked methodically, targeting the body with vicious hooks, then switching upstairs to rattle Edwin's head with short, sharp combinations. By the middle rounds, the damage was becoming visible. Edwin's face began to swell. His movement slowed, and for the first time in his career, he looked genuinely hurt. But true to his warrior spirit, he kept coming forward, kept looking for the one shot that could turn everything around. The crowd at the Hilton Center was witnessing something special, not just a fight, but a systematic dismantling of a champion. Chavez was demonstrating why many considered him the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, while Edwin was showing the heart that had made him a fan favorite. By the 8th round, Edwin was absorbing punishment that would have stopped lesser men. His left eye was nearly closed, blood streamed from his nose, and his legs weren't carrying him with their usual spring. Yet somehow, impossibly, he kept pressing forward. The turning point came in round 11. Edwin's face was a battered mess, one eye completely shut, blood flowing freely from his nose and mouth. The warrior who had never been stopped, who had built his reputation on an iron chin and indomitable will, was finally breaking down. When Edwin's trainer mercifully stopped the fight, it marked more than just another victory for Chavez. It was the visible end of Edwin's physical prime at the tragically young age of 24. The beating he had absorbed was so severe that many observers wondered if he would ever be the same fighter again. But the real tragedy wasn't just what happened in the ring that night. It was what that beating represented. Edwin's celebrated bravery, the quality that had carried him to championship glory, had finally worked against him. His refusal to quit, his willingness to absorb punishment for the sake of honor, had led to damage that would haunt him for the rest of his shortened career. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Medical experts who examined the fight noted the cumulative effect of the punishment Edwin had absorbed. This wasn't just a single bad night, it was the culmination of a career built on taking risks and absorbing damage. Still, being Edwin Rosario meant refusing to accept defeat as final. Despite the brutal toll of the Chavez fight, he continued his characteristic pattern of ups and downs. He would go on to win a 3rd lightweight title, then move up in weight to capture the WBA Super Lightweight Championship in 1991. But those who knew Edwin best could see the changes. His reflexes weren't quite as sharp, his chin wasn't quite as solid, and his recovery time between fights grew longer. The cumulative damage was beginning to show in ways that went beyond simple statistics. The end of his peak came in January 1993, when he faced Frankie Randall in a fight that should have been routine. Instead, Edwin was stopped in the 7th round, a shocking result that preceded a 4-year hiatus from the ring. That hiatus wasn't just about boxing. During those years away from the sport, Edwin was fighting battles that made his ring wars look simple by comparison. The same substances that had claimed his brother Chapo were tightening their grip on Edwin's life. The cruel irony was impossible to ignore. A man who could absorb tremendous physical punishment from world-class athletes couldn't withstand his own emotional pain. The champion who had never backed down from any opponent was losing a war against demons that fought without rules or mercy. And while the boxing world moved on to new champions and fresh storylines, Edwin Rosario was discovering that some victories come at a price too high to pay, and some battles can't be won with heart and determination alone. While fans cheered Edwin Rosario's wars in the ring, he was losing a far more deadly battle outside of it. The demons that had claimed his brother Chapo were tightening their grip on Edwin's life. And this time, there would be no comeback victory. The signs had been there for years, hidden behind championship belts and knockout highlights. But by the early 1990s, Edwin's struggle with drug and alcohol addiction could no longer be concealed. What started as a way to cope with his brother's death had evolved into a chronic issue that was destroying everything he had worked to build. The boxing world, which had celebrated Edwin's warrior spirit in the ring, turned its back when he needed support the most. There were no intervention programs, no mental health resources, no safety nets for fighters dealing with trauma and addiction. The sport that had made millions from Edwin's blood and sweat offered nothing when he was drowning. The public humiliation came in the form of an arrest that made headlines across Puerto Rico. Edwin Chapo Rosario, the 3-time world champion who had once commanded 6-figure purses, was caught stealing beer from a local supermarket. The image was devastating. A fallen hero reduced to petty theft to feed his addiction. That arrest became a symbol of Edwin's personal crumbling. Here was a man who had represented Puerto Rican pride on the world stage, who had earned the respect of legends like Julio Cesar Chavez, reduced to a common criminal in the eyes of the public. The shame was unbearable, but the addiction was stronger than his pride. The personal toll extended far beyond public embarrassment. Edwin's marriage, already strained by years of his erratic behavior and broken promises, finally collapsed. His wife couldn't watch him destroy himself any longer. She left, taking their 4 daughters with her. The family that should have been his anchor was gone. Edwin found himself alone in ways that his ring opponents could never have achieved. Prison followed a short stint that marked his complete fall from grace. The man who had once been Puerto Rico's golden boy was now an inmate. Another casualty of a system that created champions but abandoned them when the cheering stopped. What made Edwin's decline even more tragic was the pattern it revealed. His brother Chapo's death from drug use hadn't been a warning, it had been a preview. The Rosario family was trapped in a cycle of trauma and self-destruction that transcended individual choices or personal weakness. The root of Edwin's addiction ran deeper than most people understood. Boxing had taught him to absorb punishment, to push through pain, to never show weakness. But those same qualities that made him a great fighter made him vulnerable to self-medication when the emotional pain became unbearable. Every brutal beating he had taken in the ring, every controversial decision, every moment when his body screamed for relief, all of it accumulated into a psychological burden that substances promised to ease. The physical trauma of boxing had created emotional wounds that never properly healed. The cruel irony wasn't lost on those who knew Edwin best. A man who could withstand the hardest punchers in the world couldn't handle his own thoughts and memories. The champion who had never quit in the ring was surrendering to an opponent that fought without mercy or rules. During his darkest period, Edwin lost everything that had once defined him. His boxing skills deteriorated, his reputation was in ruins, his family was gone, and his health was failing. The substances that had promised escape had instead become his prison. Friends and family watched helplessly as Edwin spiraled deeper into addiction. Interventions were attempted, promises were made and broken, and hope flickered briefly before being extinguished again. The pattern became painfully familiar. Moments of clarity followed by devastating relapses. The boxing establishment that had once promoted Edwin as a marketable commodity was nowhere to be found during his struggle. There were no charity events, no rehabilitation programs funded by the sport that had profited from his courage. He had given boxing everything, and when he needed help, boxing gave him nothing in return. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of Edwin's decline was how it mirrored his brother's fate. The same cycle that had claimed Chapo was repeating itself, as if the Rosario family was destined to lose its brightest stars to the same dark forces. By 1993, when Edwin took that 4-year hiatus from boxing, everyone knew the real reason wasn't about rest or rejuvenation. It was about survival. Edwin was fighting for his life against an opponent that had already claimed too many victories in his family. And as the years passed with no sign of Edwin in boxing rings, those who remembered his glory days began to wonder if they had witnessed the end of more than just a career. They had watched a champion fall. But the question remained, would Edwin Rosario ever find a way to get back up? In 1997, Edwin Rosario thought he had one more miracle left in him. He was tragically wrong. After 4 years away from the ring, 4 years battling the demons that had destroyed his personal life, Edwin made the decision that would ultimately seal his fate. He was coming back to boxing. The comeback story seemed promising at first. Edwin had reportedly entered a rehabilitation program and made a solemn vow to get clean. For those who remembered his devastating power and warrior heart, the possibility of redemption felt real. Maybe, just maybe, the man who had won 3 lightweight titles could find his way back to greatness. And for a brief, shining moment, it looked like Edwin might pull off the impossible. He went on a 5-fight winning streak, displaying flashes of the power that had once made him one of boxing's most feared punchers. The World Boxing Council took notice, ranking him among their top contenders and reviving hopes for one final championship run. There was talk of a big payday against marquee opponents like Oscar de la Hoya. For Edwin and his supporters, it felt like the ultimate redemption story was within reach. The fallen champion rising from the ashes of addiction to reclaim his place among boxing's elite. 5. But the harsh reality was far different from the fairy tale narrative. Edwin was no longer a major draw, no longer the fighter who commanded 6-figure purses and HBO televised bouts. Instead, he was fighting on small, untelevised cards, a far cry from the bright lights of Madison Square Garden, where he had once battled Hector Camacho. Those who watched Edwin's comeback closely could see the truth behind the winning record. His reflexes weren't what they once were. His power had diminished, and most telling of all, his recovery time between fights had slowed dramatically. The years of substance abuse had taken a toll that no amount of training could fully repair. Still, Edwin pressed forward, driven by a combination of financial necessity and the dream of one final championship moment. He had bills to pay, a reputation to rebuild, and perhaps most importantly, a need to prove to himself that he could overcome the addiction that had cost him everything. December 1st, 1997. Edwin had just completed what would be his final fight. Another victory to add to his comeback streak. In a gesture that revealed how much his family still meant to him despite the years of pain he had caused them, Edwin made a trip to visit his ex-wife and the 4 daughters he had lost during his darkest days. The visit was bittersweet, a chance for Edwin to see the children who had grown up largely without their father, and for them to see a man who appeared to be genuinely trying to rebuild his shattered life. For those few hours, it might have felt like healing was possible. After the visit, Edwin returned to his parents' home in Toa Baja, the same neighborhood where his boxing journey had begun decades earlier. He complained of feeling ill, a detail that, in retrospect, seems ominous. But at the time, no one suspected that Edwin was facing his final fight. The next morning, Edwin's father made the devastating discovery. Edwin was found dead in his childhood bedroom, the same room where he had once dreamed of boxing glory and planned his rise to championship status. The boy who had left Candelaria as a conquering hero had returned home to die at just 34 years old. The official cause of death was an aneurysm with acute pulmonary edema, a condition where the lungs fill with fluid. But the medical examiners made it clear that Edwin's history of narcotics and alcohol abuse was a direct contributing factor to his premature death. The timing was cruelly ironic. Edwin had been fighting to overcome his addiction, had shown genuine signs of progress, and was building momentum toward what could have been a meaningful comeback. Instead, the damage from years of substance abuse had already been done, creating medical conditions that no amount of willpower could overcome. In those final months, Edwin had seemed to be winning his most important fight, the battle against addiction. He was clean, he was focused, and he was demonstrating the same determination that had once carried him to 3 world titles. But boxing had taught him to ignore his body's warning signs, to push through pain, and to never surrender. 5. Perhaps that warrior mentality, which had served him so well in the ring, prevented him from seeking medical help when his body began showing signs of the damage that addiction had inflicted. The man who had never quit against any opponent was defeated by an enemy that had been working silently for years. Edwin Rosario died alone in his childhood bedroom, just as his comeback was gaining momentum and his life seemed to be stabilizing. The tragedy wasn't just that he died young, it was that he died just as redemption appeared within reach. Edwin Rosario's legacy is defined by a duality that is at once triumphant and tragic. On December 3, 1997, over 5,000 people gathered to pay their respects to the fallen champion. The funeral was a testament to how deeply Edwin had touched his community. Celebrities, former opponents, and ordinary fans came together to honor a man who had represented Puerto Rican pride on the world stage. A group of Puerto Rican world champions served as pallbearers, carrying the casket of a fighter who had earned their ultimate respect. These were men who understood the price of championship glory, who knew intimately the physical and emotional toll of professional boxing. Their presence spoke to Edwin's place in boxing history not just as a champion, but as a warrior who had earned the admiration of his peers. In 2006, nearly a decade after his death, Edwin was posthumously inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. The honor recognized his exceptional fighting skills, his dynamite power. His professional record: 47 wins, 6 losses, 4 draws, with 41 knockouts, told the story of a fighter who consistently delivered excitement and drama. But the Hall of Fame plaque doesn't capture the full complexity of Edwin's story. It doesn't mention the brother, whose death from drug use set a tragic pattern in motion. It doesn't acknowledge the addiction that cost Edwin his family, his dignity, and ultimately, his life. It doesn't address the system that celebrated his willingness to absorb punishment while offering no support when that punishment became too much to bear. Edwin's story has become a powerful cautionary tale, often cited as a prime example of talent that failed to reach its full potential due to personal struggles. Boxing historians point to his career as evidence of the sport's darker realities, how fighters can be celebrated as heroes while being systematically exploited and abandoned. The timeline of Edwin's life reveals a heartbreaking pattern. Professional victories shadowed by personal defeats. His first championship came in 1983, the same era when his brother's death introduced the specter of addiction into his world. His greatest triumphs in the ring coincided with his deepest struggles outside of it. What makes Edwin's story particularly tragic is how preventable much of his suffering appears in retrospect. His addiction didn't develop in isolation. It emerged from untreated trauma, inadequate support systems, and a sport that prioritized entertainment value over fighter welfare. The boxing establishment that profited from his courage offered nothing when he needed help most. Edwin's death at 34 raises uncomfortable questions about boxing's responsibility to its athletes. How many other fighters have struggled with similar demons while the sport looked the other way? How many potential champions have been lost to addiction, depression, and trauma that could have been treated with proper intervention and support? The medical community now recognizes the connection between repeated head trauma and long-term psychological issues, including increased susceptibility to substance abuse. Edwin's story predates much of this understanding, but it serves as a stark reminder of boxing's human costs that extend far beyond what happens between the ropes. Yet Edwin's legacy transcends tragedy. His fighting style embodied the very best of Puerto Rican boxing: courage, determination, and an unwillingness to back down from any challenge. Young fighters still study his techniques, still marvel at his punching power, still draw inspiration from his rise from poverty to championship glory. In Puerto Rico, Edwin remains a beloved figure whose story serves multiple purposes. For some, he represents the heights that determination and talent can achieve. For others, he's a cautionary reminder about the importance of addressing mental health and addiction with the same seriousness given to physical training. The cruel irony of Edwin's life is that his greatest strength, his warrior spirit, ultimately contributed to his downfall. The same qualities that made him a champion in the ring made him vulnerable to the demons that haunted him outside of it. He approached addiction with the same mentality he brought to boxing. Ignore the pain, push through the damage, never surrender. But addiction isn't an opponent that can be defeated through willpower alone. It requires professional help, support systems, and often medical intervention. Edwin fought his addiction the same way he fought his opponents alone, with fierce determination, but without the resources necessary for victory. Modern boxing has slowly begun to address some of the issues that Edwin's story highlights. There are more resources for fighters dealing with addiction and mental health challenges, though many argue the sport still doesn't do enough. Edwin's death serves as a reminder of how much further the boxing community needs to go. The ultimate tragedy of Edwin Rosario's life isn't just that he died young, it's that he died fighting demons that the sport he loved could have helped him overcome. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about boxing's priorities and the real cost of entertainment that relies on human suffering. Today, more than 25 years after Edwin's death, his story remains painfully relevant. Every time a fighter struggles with addiction, every time a champion falls from grace, every time the boxing world celebrates violence while ignoring its consequences, Edwin Rosario's ghost whispers a warning from the past. So, what do we learn from the life and death of Edwin Chapo Rosario? That talent alone isn't enough. That champions are human beings who bleed, hurt, and struggle just like everyone else. That the sport we love comes with a price that extends far beyond what we see on television. Most importantly, Edwin's story teaches us that true strength isn't measured only in knockouts and championships. It's also found in seeking help when we need it, in supporting those who are struggling, and in creating systems that protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them. Edwin Rosario's death certificate may list pulmonary edema and an aneurysm as the causes, but the real killers were trauma, addiction, and a sport that failed to protect one of its brightest stars. His legacy challenges us to do better for current fighters, for future champions, and for anyone struggling with demons that seem impossible to defeat. What do you think? Could Edwin Rosario's tragedy have been prevented with better support systems and addiction treatment? How can boxing better protect its fighters from the demons outside the ring? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories that reveal the human cost of the sport we love.